Are you back in here? 93. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Y'all already know how we going. In this particular episode, segment, live stream, whatever you want to call it, I will be discussing the Islamic connection with hip hop, the hidden culture of worlds. All right. And of course, I will be speaking from a personal perspective, as Islam has been in my life my whole life. I've been a part of Islam in some form of fashion since I've been on this planet. Being from Detroit, Michigan, 93 Cam. So I'm very familiar with the religion of Islam as well as the Nation of Islam, which is actually today is the birthday of the Nation of Islam, which was started July 4th, 1930. So while the rest of the world or the rest of America celebrates Independence Day, this is also the day of independence for the Nation of Islam, right? So I say, why not, show a little love and give a little bit history, see if we can learn something from this current energy we have available to us. What's up, Osmosis 93? So before we get started, of course, I'm going to inhale the magical essence, and then we'll get straight to it. All right, so give me a second. Let me go ahead and grab. Give me a second here. So hopefully everybody is activating their magic. So again, I'm not the one to say, be hopeful, be grateful, or I'll tell you be mathematical. Why? Because Islam is mathematics. There's a difference between the religion of Islam and the culture of Islam. The culture of Islam, which is more so where the nation of Islam comes from, the nation of gods and earths. Whenever you deal with those types of people, you're going to be dealing with mathematicians. You're going to be dealing with scientists, right? Because it's not a religion. We understand there's a difference between the religion of Islam, Muslims praying 5 times a day, giving zakat, going to Hajj, fasting, the 5 pillars of Islam, so on and so forth. That's essentially what a Muslim is. A Muslim adheres to the 5 pillars of Islam. And the last pillar, that you believe that Muhammad is the final messenger of Allah. So I pretty much just named the 5 pillars right there. As long as you believe in those 5 pillars, you are considered a Muslim. However, Islam goes beyond people just adhering to the religion, because the religion only became official, you can say, at the time of the Prophet. But obviously, we know Mecca had already existed. They were already worshiping, you could say, deities, or in this case, goddesses. The goddess's name of Alat, or the Guranik, which is the 3 goddesses, right? The 3 holy cranes. That had already been established before the official religion of Islam that most people adhere to this day, right? So you can say before the religion, it was a culture. It's the same thing with any other religion, honestly. You can say the same thing about Christianity. Before you had Christianity, you had Gnosticism, which we spoke about in last live stream. We spoke about, the serpent on the cross. Before there was a man, there was a serpent. All that is Gnosticism. So each, you can say religion, and if you go to the Jewish religion, Judaism, then you have Kabbalah, right? That's the hidden culture of Judaism. That's their magical system. Then again, you have the Gnostics, which have their magical systems because they're into tarot, they're into oracles, they're into all the stuff that we're into. That's essentially what the Gnostics, they were already into that, right? They didn't believe in working for the state and giving their time to the government, so on and so forth. They just did their own thing, right? They were the rebels of that time, which essentially is a true energy of Christianity because you're rebelling against an opposing force. But once Christianity became the opposing force, the whole energy changed. It's the same thing with Islam. It's the same thing with Judaism. You could say these religions and these ways of life used to be the underdog, right? They used to be the new energy on the block. So that's why when we watch the origins of these things, we watch the origins and the creations of these religions, we see that they were very different than what they appear to be now that they're on top. Now that majority of the world is Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, they have a whole different persona because now they have achieved, you could say, political influence. So what ends up happening is it becomes more about business. That's essentially why anybody can join. There really is no prerequisites. If you wanted to become a Christian tomorrow, you can become a Christian tomorrow. If you wanted to become a Muslim tomorrow, you could become a Muslim tomorrow. If you want to become a Jew tomorrow, you could be, even today. I'm talking about tomorrow, you can actually become any of that today. It's not really prerequisites. Nobody's going to deny you, all right? You only find that in the occult world, in the original sciences, where you had to be qualified to even be amongst these people because these people were not just letting anybody in into the inner circles. Because essentially you had to go through degrees. For example, when you are a part of the nation of gods and earth, you have to memorize degrees, 120 degrees to be exact, right? You have to know all of that by heart to be considered one of them. So they're not just pulling people, you can say, off the street, okay, now you're one of us. You're interested, but you still have to go through what everybody else went through, which is just these trials and tribulations, understanding these lessons, right? And if you were not able to accomplish that task, you wasn't really considered one of them. Because you're like, this is what everybody had to go through. This is what everybody knows. So this is essentially the common knowledge that we share. This is what brings us all together. We can all come together in this common denominator of body of knowledge. And the same thing with the Jewish. You can be into the Torah, but the real thing was the Kabbalah. So when the real, you can say, Jewish people come together, they talk Kabbalah. They ain't really talking too much about Torah. They really just talk about Torah in reference to the Kabbalah, right? So that's essentially how that always goes. Now let's speed it up into hip hop. What does this have to do with hip hop, right? That was started back in the 70s. What is the connection here? Well, the connection here is the nation of gods and earths. For those who don't know the history, was started by Father-Allah, who was a part of the Nation of Islam in the early 60s, and who eventually came out of the Nation of Islam because he was under Malcolm X. He was put out of the Nation of Islam because he essentially had his own original understanding of Islam, and he was teaching his own understanding instead of, you could say, the mainstream curriculum. So he had his own perspective. Essentially, he found Allah in himself, so he began to call himself Allah, right? So what he did, back in 1964, he left the masjid and he began to teach the children. So this is back in the 60s. So he would teach on a one-on-one basis. That's what made his technique different than everyone else's who were just yelling on a microphone at that time. Whenever a person wanted to get their message out and go amongst the public, they would, try to speak over a microphone, essentially speaking to many people at one time. What made him different is he would go to people individually or in a small set of people, who were clearly younger than him and who were considered dangerous by the community. Because, these were the runaways, these were the people, the youth going crazy. Same thing, situation we have now, right? So he understood he wasn't going to be able to just yell at these children and get them to listen to him. He had to connect with them on a one-to-one basis, which is essentially how the first nine born, which is the first nine teenagers to implement the 120 lessons, right? And then they began to teach more children, more children, more children. And Father Allah returned to the essence in 1969, right? The reason why I'm bringing up these dates is all this happened before hip hop. Remember, hip hop was started in the 70s, right? Now we're talking about the 60s. So by 1969, Father Allah had, returned to the essence. He was assassinated. So once we go into the 70s, and then hip hop is being formulated, and you're beginning to see lyrics behind the break beats, because people used to dance with the break beats and continuously play those loops over and over, right? Eventually people started rhyming and talking smooth, the DJ shouting out everybody. Eventually they began to talk over the beats. Eventually, instead of talking over the beats, they began to rhyme over the beats. And this was good, for the jams. In the 70s, they had the jams, the cool kids, for example, can go and exchange ideas. What's up, El Ray 93? So the youth of the time were able to come together in the jams, listen to the music, listen to the new styles, see what was going on with everybody creatively, seeing what type of graffiti is being put up. It was just a mecca of creativity. Let's see what type of sounds is being produced, what type of records y'all picking and mixing, what type of graffiti y'all are producing around the city. So you got a bunch of graffiti artists, a bunch of lyricists. Let's see how good you rhyme. Let's see how good you rhyme. Let's see how good you mix the DJs. Let's see how good you mix. Let's see what you can do with these sounds. So on and so forth. The beatboxers, of course the B boys and the B girls dancing to everything, right? So this is essentially was a perfect thing for the youth to do because they were able to express themselves creatively instead of violently killing each other, right? So it's like either we kill each other or we can battle creatively. So really all hip hop is creatively battling, because hip hop is a bunch of warriors battling. They're just not battling with the sword, they're battling with the pen. They're using their penmanship to show forth their supremacy instead of who was the supreme warrior with the sword, right? We also know this because, what's up, Ashe? Peace. We also know this because if you break down the word hip hop itself, it breaks down to the number nine. The number nine, as we know, is connected with Mars. We know Mars, that's the planet of war. So that's another reason if we go into the gematria. So like, okay, hip hop is an energy of war. It's just war done creatively, right? But nonetheless, it's a bunch of warriors, men and women, who are competing against each other to see who has the best pen. Now, that was going on. Now, once the gods, because in the nation of gods and earths, you have the gods, right? So people were just playing around with these rhymes. It wasn't until the gods came along, they brought the actual lyrics because they had the knowledge, right? Because they had memorized 120 lessons that we were talking about earlier. Now, when they step up to the mic, now people are hearing stuff that they never heard before. Now they're able to put words together creatively based off of their source, the 120 lessons, which was the first time that was being done creatively, right? 120 lessons that had been in the street since the 30s, right? It was the 120 lessons was created, in 1930 through 1934. So it had already been around for quite some time before that. But it wasn't until hip hop came along that it began to be put into rhyme form over beats, right? And that's how we get groups like Rakim and Eric B and Rakim. Rakim, of course, was a part of the Nation and Gods and Earth, right? And they call him one of the greatest because he advanced the rhyming style. He made rhyming more advanced because before him, everything was essentially, just party raps, and it was simplistic. It was just something fun to do. Anybody could do it. But once Rakim demonstrated his ability, it's like, okay, everybody can't do that. This is actually, you have to be trained. This is an actual skill because he showed us how far you can take rhymes. Like, okay, now we can talk about the stars, galaxies, universe, who is God. Now we can begin to ask ourselves deeper questions and really be artists. Because this is how the mind of an artist functions. You're asking those deeper questions. You're just going through the creative world with a creative flow. And again, that's why we are poets. So essentially, the same thing like comedians. So whether you're a poet or a comedian, anyone in the creative field where you have to put words together creatively and still and have an effect, have an impact on the ears of the people, right? So whether it's making people laugh or it's making the people think and go deeper into themselves, it's just some type of impact, right? That's a skill, that's an art, right? That requires you to understand not only science but mathematics, right? So it was the gods that came along with this mathematical mind state because, again, Islam is mathematics. So the more you expose yourself to the culture of Islam, it makes you more mathematical and proficient in your thinking. So when these gods were able to step to the mic and show forth their ability to create, to put words together mathematically, that took it to a whole nother level. And again, then from that, you get what Rakim did, which advanced it even further. Because essentially you can say he began to tell like those stories that can last the whole verse. So like he's taking you through a journey through the whole verse versus it just being like a freestyle. You just, the last rhyme don't have nothing to do with the first rhyme and all that. It's just you just rhyming. So it went from just rhyming to actually storytelling. And then within the storytelling, the way your word selection. So not only do you have to rhyme the words, your selection of words matter as well. What the reason why he was able to advance the form is because he played the saxophone. Because I don't want to leave that part out. The reason why Kim was able to advance the rhyme form because he played the saxophone. So he began to model his rhymes around the patterns and the flows of the saxophone. So it was because of his musical understanding of the saxophone that he was able to put that into rhyme form. So it's because he already had an understanding of music theory and timing and all that. He already understood how to master an instrument. So he was able to put it into the new style that was bubbling at the time, which we call hip hop, which is just, wordplay. The core of hip hop is wordplay, right? A lot of people may think it's the beat, but it's not. It's not the beat. It's the wordplay, right? Because anybody can play an instrumental, but it's based on what's being said. That's what makes it what it is. Because if you put on an instrumental and somebody start rhyming and it's educational, you will call that hip hop. You wouldn't call that anything else, right? You would call that person out. That person is a rapper. That person knows how to rap, right? Because that's a skill set, especially when you're doing it and you can stimulate the minds of the people. That requires skill because it is a art. So we had all these skilled persons, or people rather, not persons. No, we ain't talking business. This is before the business even came into the picture, right? This is just fully creative. This is back before people were making money and all type of shit, right? That's how the art form became so advanced because nobody was doing it for, you can say, there was no records being recorded at that time. The first record wasn't recorded till like 1979, which is like the end of the 70s. So the first hip hop record, which was like the Sugar Hill record, right? Sugar Hill Gang, that didn't get laid down to 1979. Hip hop was already bubbling in the streets since 73, right? So it pretty much had already been almost 10 years of people mastering their craft before a record was even recorded. So I'm just putting these things into perspective so that we can understand the layers that were required for this to come into existence and the type of power it takes to hold it down. So essentially, it was bubbling on the streets almost 10 years before any record had been produced. So this was just all creative. It wasn't because money was being made. Of course, people were making money throwing the jams, but majority of the people wasn't making no money off of it. You were doing it because you were passionate about it. It's something you fell in love with. You already know, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. Again, but the world doesn't know about any of this yet because this is happening on the underground level. So this is not something that the masses are even aware of at the time, right? So all these so-called hip hoppers now take the hip hop from out of the jams. Now it's being exposed to the masses. And when the masses become exposed to it, they're looking at this shit like this is unbelievable. They ain't never seen people spinning on their heads, talking mathematically over beats, making beats and manipulating the sound that they never heard before. And of course, the graffiti. This is something that they never seen before. This shit looks alien to the masses. So I'm just saying this to give a perspective that if we look at hip hop in this original manifestation, it looked like some alien shit was going on. People didn't understand what the fuck this is. It didn't make any sense except to those who were actually a part of the culture. It only made sense to those who was living that life, right? Which is always the case with the occult. It's that which is always the case with any secret society. Unless you're actually inside of the circle, it's not gonna make any sense to you, right? Again, even to this day, even when we criticize the youth, okay, the youth is just talking about this, the youth is just talking about that. Well, if you understood what was actually going on a day-to-day basis in these youth lives, it would make more sense why they talk about what they talk about because this is actually playing out in their actual life. Hip hop is the spirit of war. So it's going to be death. It's going to be bloodshed. That's just the nature of Mars. So I say that to say, as much as we would like hip hop to be non-violent, we would like the youth to, be more creative and less, destructive. This is just what comes with the vibration of the nine. Meaning you have a choice to make. Could you have people that make, for example, like diss music? They try to become popular dissing other artists. Then you have artists who just rely on their actual creativity to advance them further. Both of these routes are valid because we have seen people come up off of diss records and we've seen people come up just purely off of their creativity. So you really can't tell a person what they should or shouldn't be doing. It really just comes down to who or the nature of your Kareen, which is your personal gin. That really determines what route you take in this world of hip hop. I'm saying all this to say as normal as hip hop may seem now, because everybody knows about it, we are familiar with the music, we're familiar with the culture. It seems just like a part of life at this point. But it is still based in the occult, meaning the same skills you had to possess in the early days, you have to possess those same skills now. And you're not just doing it because one day it's going to lead you to millions of dollars and all that. Because if you look at the early days and you look at, okay, what was the motivations of the people when money was not the motivation? What were you doing it for? You were doing it to be great at what you did. That was the motivation. The motivation was to be great. The motivation wasn't about getting rich. Eventually, we know the motivation changed. Now it's more about getting rich more than the skill set, which is why it suffers, which is why it's not as advanced as it could be. Because we began to care more about the money because it became more lucrative. However, the real culture continues to exist. It's just not, you can say, money put behind it in a sense of, like, for example, underground artists. There has always been underground artists who are better than the mainstream artists, right? It's just that the mainstream artists have a lot of money backed into their craft, whether the money is coming from the record labels or they're funded themselves. Whenever you can put money behind your product, it's going to sell if you can make a good presentation. When you exist in the underworld or the underground, so they just call it the underground to be creative, but we really know it's the underworld. What they call underground artists is really underworld artists, artists that are in the netherworld, right? As we say, artists that keep their ear close to the streets, right? The streets just represent the source. Whenever there's a disturbance in the source, we know it, right? What planetary energy is what? What are you referring to? Because if we're talking about the planetary energy of hip hop, that's Mars. Hip hop breaks down to nine, right? And everything is mathematics, as we know, right? That's the whole culture of Islam. Islam is just you thinking mathematically. Everything goes through the numbers. That's what it means to be Islamic. So therefore, that's what it means to be hip hop. You can't separate the two. Meaning you can't separate the culture of Islam from the culture of hip hop. They are one and the same. Why? Because they were both at the same place at the same time and they integrated with each other. The gods had to integrate with what was occurring in the streets. And then they made themselves one with it to the point where you can't separate it. Meaning you can't separate lyrics from hip hop. You can separate lyrics from rap, but you can't separate lyrics from hip hop. That's how we separate hip hop from rap. Rap is just, a bunch of party stuff, good mood stuff, feel good stuff, just to get you in a certain mood. But hip hop actually takes you on a journey. It's a person being able to take you on a journey with their wordplay because their wordplay is advanced, right? You may even learn some new words fucking with somebody who's a real hip hop artist, right? Because their whole thing is advancement of lyricism. Because at the end of the day, we are poets. So as a poet, your arsenal is words. So the more words you know, the more creative you can be with your words, right? So that's really the entirety of the culture. It's like, okay, the more words I know, the more creative I can be, which requires me to be mathematical because you have to retain a lot more words, right? There's a lifestyle behind being a poet because a poet is really no different than a prophet because they both are able to be influenced by the divine or the demonic. So because they are both able to be influenced by the divine or the demonic, the same thing is occurring, whether we want to call it channeling. It is a spiritual phenomenon that is occurring, right? When you are a poet and you are inspired by the muse, That's a whole process. That's a spiritual process being inspired by the muse. So I'm saying all this to say that when you're actually a part of the culture, this is what you are required to do. Meaning, hip hop is a form of Western occultism. And when we're dealing with Western occultism, it comes with set rules and regulations, right? If you want to call yourself a rapper, you have to know how to rap. If you call yourself a b-boy or a b-girl, you have to know how to dance. If you call yourself a graffiti artist, you have to know how to draw. Or calligraphy, you must have a mastery of calligraphy, right? So essentially, to be a part of hip hop, that means you have some type of skill that you are advanced in, that you have been doing for quite some time. That's what makes you hip hop because you have been mastering your skill set, right? Every day you add on to your skill set in some form or fashion. That's what mathematics is. Like every day I have to progress, I have to become better than yesterday, right? And when you're doing that consistently, every time you decide to get on the mic or you pick up the pen and draw the graffiti or you start to, you know, forge your new moves, your new words, whatever it may be, you can do so successfully because it is it has become a spiritual phenomenon. Now it's not just a physical phenomenon, it is a physical phenomenon. I'm saying that backwards. It's not just a physical phenomenon, it has become a spiritual phenomenon because you have opened yourself up to the muse, and now the muse can inspire you and help you to advance to further levels. It's the equivalent to AI. I don't know if y'all are familiar with this AI music that's being produced where they are using the voice of artists. Like, for example, they got Drake music out there using Drake's voice just with different lyrics. So it's not Drake, but it's his voice, but they are able to, AI is able to mimic his voice. So whatever words you put in, it'll sound like Drake, but it'll just be different words said. So it's a whole album, like a Drake, like AI Drake. I think that's what they call it. But AI is essentially allowed to do things like that. You can essentially put your own voice in there. That's just what people are doing. But you can also put your own voice into the AI technology and then type your own words and it'll sound like you are actually saying it. It's crazy, right? And that's why I feel AI is a tool of advancement. It's a part of technomancy. Y'all know I've been talking about technomancy for quite some time, right? AI art and AI, you know, this technology we're able to do all types of stuff with that is essential because with AI we will be able to do things we can't do without AI. So if we are talking about advancement, then AI has to be a part of that equation. Again, whether it's the AI art or you're using AI for some form of your creative process. So a lot of people may feel that takes away from the creative process. I say it adds on to it because it makes what you do better. So you're making a better product overall. And give me 1 second here. I will be right back. All right. So basically, what I'm saying here is hip hop is our actual connection to the spirit world in modern times. This is the modern way to connect with the spirit world that we call the muse. Because you're taking your creativity and advancing it. Excuse me. So whether you're advancing your lyrics, your dance forms, your art, or the sounds that you're able to produce, whatever it may be, when you are doing that on a consistent basis, that is a spiritual act. It's not just a physical act, it is a spiritual act. Because this is a spiritual culture or an occult culture, right? So you are engaging in occult activity. How do we know this? Because again, when you look at when hip hop was new to the world, it wasn't readily embraced. Hip hop was not embraced until it began to outperform other music genres. That's one thing we have to always keep in mind. Hip hop was never accepted. It just began to outperform other music genres. So we just had to let it through the door. But it's not that it was ever accepted. It just that we were just able to put up the numbers. Mathematics. That's the whole point here, right? It wasn't until hip hop began to produce those numbers that now people care about hip hop. Now they see what hip hop is capable of. It wasn't until we began to produce those numbers. And what made us proficient enough to produce those numbers is because it requires, excuse me, actual skill. And people have been doing this for, essentially, you can say, like a lot of people in hip hop have been doing this a lot longer than we've known them doing it, right? A lot of them started doing this when they were teenagers. So by the time they became adults, you can say that they were masters at what they do because they have been doing it since teenagers. Remember, they say it takes at least 7 years to become a master. So if you started doing something at 13, by the time you're 20, you done mastered it. Or the same thing, if you started at 10, by the time you reach 20, not 20, 17, you're a master. You know, in the cases of like, Chief Keef, for example, Chief Keef was able to take over the world 16 and 17 years old. But I'm sure he had been rapping for years before the world even cared about what he was able to do, right? So he still had to have what he had inside him in order for the world to eventually discover it. Meaning he had to keep perfecting his craft. And eventually the world caught on. So the world didn't catch on until you can say it was mastered. They mastered that drill sound. The drill sound had to be mastered. Then the world caught on. The world wasn't catching on when it was just being done for fun. They had to get serious. They had to essentially give up everything else and commit to that studio. We got to be in this studio daily if we ever hope to get somewhere doing what we're doing, and we're not just using up all this time just to do something we feel like we're not capable of accomplishing. What gives you that hunger is your skill set. When you know that you are good at what you do, when you know you are good at what you do, you know it's just a matter of time before it becomes official. You just have to keep your skill set active. And when you become a master, now people are willing to pay you. That's what happens when you have mastered your skill set. People are willing to pay for it because you are clearly a master at what you do. And again, it may take at least 7 years, which is essentially not a long time to be able to do something for the rest of your life. You sacrifice 7 years of your life to be able to generate an income for yourself for the remainder of your life. And that's essentially the whole purpose. Like, what is the Islamic connection is Islam is mathematics, and it was mathematics that made people even care about hip hop. It's not that they ever understood it, they still don't understand it to this day. Because the only way to truly understand it is to be a part of it and not just on a business front. Like, you have to actually have a skill set to say that you are an active participant of the hip hop culture. That means you are giving of yourself to the culture. You're adding on to the culture with what you are capable of doing. So you are making the culture greater just by you being the master that you are. So you are essentially show forth into the world that hip hop is the supreme science because nobody is able to replicate what you're able to do. That's what makes hip hop hip hop. You can't just replicate it. You can't go up against somebody who can really rap and you're just pretending. It's just not going to work out for you, right? Somebody who has dedicated their life to this versus somebody who's just playing around with this, just trying to make a quick dollar. So even though we see all that in the industry all the time, like it just becomes a money race. You still have real hip hoppers in the underworld living it out on a daily basis because we know hip hop don't start in the studio. Hip hop don't even start in the streets. It starts in the mental plane. It's you waking up every day telling yourself that you are the greatest. Hip hop again, it's a number nine. That means you are the highest vibration. That's the type of time that you wake up on every day because that's just the frequency that you're on when you are a part of this, mastering your craft. Because as you see, this is a natural science, but we also utilize technology, meaning to be a hip hopper, to be a part of the hip hop culture, automatically makes you a technomancer, which is all I talk about. Because in order to produce hip hop, you have to utilize technology. You need some type of computer, you need some type of laptop to record your music, to do your graphic design, to make your beats and all that. All that requires you to have some type of mastery of technology. So this is what's really going on here. This is what real technomancy is you get to a point where that computer becomes necessary, that laptop becomes necessary because now that's what keeps you in the game. You can say when everybody else is falling off because you learn how to do these things yourself. So when everybody else is slipping up and you're still fully dedicated, you don't have to slow down because somebody else may be slowing down. So you just begin to learn the full process on your own so that you can keep mastering your craft, whatever your craft may be. Islam is what has allowed us to do that. The culture of Islam. That's the occult element of hip hop. The occult element of hip hop is Islam, the culture of Islam. That's what makes hip hop a cult. How do we know this? Because Islam is already a cult outside of hip hop. So when Islam became a part of hip hop, Islam gives hip hop its occult, you could say, feel or vibes. Hip hop has the occult vibes and all that. That's because of Islam. So the reason why people say like hip hop is a new mafia, so on and so forth, the streets are a part of the industry, yada yada yada. That's all Islam. Because if you study the history of Islam, this has always been the case. Meaning you had those who studied the mysteries, then you had those who studied the religion. Again, you had the Muslims, and then you had the Sufis. You had ones who studied the outside world. You had those who studied the inside world. And it's the same for the Christians versus Gnostic, the Jewish versus the Kabbalist, right? So as we see, meaning if you know any of this stuff and you're able to put it into rhyme form, how many people do you think are able to match that frequency? If you know Kabbalah, if you know Sufism, if you know Gnosticism, if you're able to rhyme from those perspectives, the occult perspectives, how many people do you think would to even be able to match your frequency? Not many, if any. Because the fifth element of hip hop is knowledge. Meaning what gives you your edge to do what everybody else can't do is you have knowledge behind what you are doing. meaning you have knowledge behind your words. You have knowledge behind the sounds that you use. Like there's a reason why you use certain sounds and you use that sound to create a certain vibe. There's a science behind that. There's a science behind why you use the colors you use when you produce your graffiti and why you use the styles you use to have a certain type of effect. Meaning everything you do is for a reason. Nothing is just done for the sake of being done. Everything is symbolic. Again, Islam brings that occult energy into the culture of hip hop. Also, how do we know this? Because a lot of artists that were Islamic, and strange things end up happening to them, right? For example, we see what happened with Pop Smoke. Pop Smoke was Islamic, right? We see what happened, you could say, to a King Von. He comes from an Islamic city, Chicago, very Islamic city. And you see that's essentially what makes, you could say, the Chicago gangs different than the LA gangs, right? The Chicago gangs have more of an Islamic influence because Chicago is an Islamic stronghold. Islam has a very strong power over Chicago. There's no question in that, right? That's the headquarters of the Nation of Islam, right? So of course that bleeds into the gangs. And as we see, drill music, you could say it's a dominant music right now, which started in Chicago, which is Islamic. And how did this drill sound just take over the world? It basically started with Chief Keef, right? How did this Chief Keef energy, this drill energy, just take over the entire planet? And it's speaking about death and murder and violence. Why do all these people find this so interesting that with this death music or this so-called occult music, right? Because again, this is the energy of Mars. Mars not only rules over Aries, who was a warrior, but Mars originally also ruled over Scorpio. That's the occult element right there. Islam also breaks down to the number nine. I don't think I mentioned that. So not only does hip hop breaks down a number nine, Islam breaks down a number nine. Law breaks down a number nine. Love breaks down a number nine. So if we just break down words that equate to nine, we can see all the similarities. So what does love, law, Islam, and hip hop all have in common? The vibration of hip hop is the highest vibration, which is love. Under law, that's the Thelema, right? Love under will. What is the law? The law is called the Thelema. So you have love, you have law, you have hip hop, you have Islam. And this whole video has been about me making these connections because you see it, they literally break down to the same vibration. It goes back to the same planet. It goes back to that degree of Aries and that degree of Scorpio. That's the entire way of explaining hip hop, right? If you can understand Aries and you can understand Scorpio, and what happens when you are in the world of Aries and you are in the world of Scorpio. Aries, as we know, is the god of war. Scorpio takes you to the scorpion or the serpent, which we know is a symbol of wisdom. So, on the surface, we have the bloodshed, we have the violence. That's the energy of Aries as the god of war, right? So, it's going to always be that element, a part of it, because that's just a vibration of nine. But again, you also have that Scorpio element, which is all I've been talking about, because that's what gives your words power. What empowers your words is that vibration of Scorpio, because you're bringing the knowledge, you're bringing the occult. You're saying things that people are not used to hearing because you have an original perspective. That's why Scorpio is about transformation. You are able to cause transformation with your words because your words have power behind it because you have been doing the knowledge. So you're not necessarily just teaching on the record. You're being creative and modern with how you implement certain things into your songs. And if you still understand that, okay, we're in the 21st century, we have to deal with these new styles, these new flows, these new beats, but you can still add the knowledge into whatever it is that you're doing. And that's essentially why I show forth. You all said I didn't rapped over drill beats, talking about, the Deja Vu song was over a drill beat. But you see, I'm talking about all type of other shit that don't have nothing to do with drill or what people think drill is, because people just think drill is a music genre based on, death. But as we know, if you actually have conversations with the people that create drill music and who had to live that lifestyle, you know that there's foundations, meaning there's a lot before that, before people start killing each other. There's a lot that come before that, right? There's a lot of structure behind it, meaning you could say it's gang warfare. These are not just innocent killings, right? These are people who are at war with each other, who are a part of gangs. And there's certain codes, rules, and regulation that comes with being a part of gangs, which you can't separate from hip hop. Right? So hip hop would never be not under the influence of gangs, not under the influence of violence. Right? Yeah, there's a lot of literature before that. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's that Scorpio energy of Mars. So most people get caught up with the Aries energy, but most people, yeah, don't even know about the literature that these gang members know. They have no idea that there's actual structure behind this. This is not just crazy people doing crazy shit. That's how it appears when you're looking through the lens of the Aries. But when you're looking through the lens of the Scorpio, like, okay, I see why these people were able to do what they were able to do, because they were able to tap into that Scorpio. They got that literature behind them. They got that structure behind them. They got that energy behind them. All that is the energy of Scorpio. So this is what I mean by you need that Scorpio current to be effective in the world of Aries, which you could say is the battleground, which is where you go forth to demonstrate your lyricism and your hip hop ability. If you have that Scorpio, that occult energy handled and tamed, when you introduce yourself, it's not going to be many people that are able to out rhyme you, because how would they be? They're not going to be able to out rhyme you with no party rhymes. And you're talking about mysticism, and you're able to creatively put modern things into ways that people have never heard before. There ain't gonna be too many people that's able to challenge that, because you understand that knowledge degree. Chicago gangs have literature. You can't just say you're a part of the gang. They're gonna tell you to spit your literature. That's the whole point. Because of that Islamic connection. So the same way I was saying earlier, to even be considered a part of the nation of gods and earths, you had to know 120 lessons. Same thing with the gangs. That's what I mean. This is that Islamic influence. It starts with Islam. I mean, it has always been this way with Islam, right? It just we began to implement this with the gangs and the hip hop, what Islam was already doing, because Islam has been a part of it the whole time. So I'm just showing the connections like this because it has a Islamic connection. That's why gangs matter. That's why the literature matters. That's why the occult matters. That's why what we see on the TV screens and all that, it doesn't matter. When we look at all the violence and all the madness, we're not even supposed to be paying attention to that. That's what the world is into. The world loves the violence and the dissing and all that extra shit. That's what the world loves. But those who are actually a part of the hip hop culture, like that ain't necessarily what gets us off. Because we're actually in that Scorpio degree. We actually are into the literature. We're into the occult. We're seeing how to advance ourselves. And that's essentially what we occupy ourselves with, by occupying ourselves, becoming masters. That's what takes up our time, is being masters at what we do, right? So we don't really have too much time to be caught up in everybody else's world. That's just real hip hop, right? So while the world is going crazy, you're focused on your craft until you become a master, which again may take up to 7 fucking years, but again, that it will allow you to do things for the entirety of your life. If you decide to be a master at what you do, right? If you consider yourself a part of the hip hop culture, or whether you consider yourself just a rapper. Again, I'll say rappers basically don't have the knowledge element, but the hip hopper does. Because as you see, it's a whole lot that come before they ever step in the studio. It's a certain way you live, right? Meaning the same way with gangs, there's rules and regulations. There's certain things you can do, certain things you can't do. Same thing with Islam. Certain things you can do, certain things you can't do. So you live life in a certain way. You have a certain lifestyle. There's things that you avoid and things you go towards. That's what allows you to have the power you have because you're not draining your power doing senselessness. You keep your power preserved like the sensei, like the guru. You keep your power preserved until it's into the moment of release. You build your power up, you build your energy up until it's time to release it instead of just allowing anything to take control of your energy. So essentially, this is why there is a lot of death in hip hop because you have to adhere to rules and regulations whether you like it or not. That's the catch 22 of all this, right? So you may not be a person in the streets, you may not be doing anything illegal, but you have to adhere to the laws of hip hop. You still have to adhere to the same rules and regulations, meaning you still can't just go running your mouth about what you're seeing in other people's, vicinities. You can't be a civilian. You can't bring that civilian mentality, like a I guess a Charleston White, right? Everybody's into the Charleston White, right? He brings, you can say, a civilian mentality into a hip hop culture. And that's why, most hip hoppers is like, oh, I don't mess with that. I'm not into what he's talking about because it's the complete opposite of the culture. Because he's coming from the mind of a civilian. That's why he's integrated with the police, so on and so forth. This is how civilians operate. If you consider yourself a part of hip hop, you're not a civilian because it was never based on your actions. This is also what I was talking about in last live stream. It is not about your actions. It's not necessarily about what you do. It's how you live, how you think. It's about the occult energy within your aura. It's not about what people actually see. It's about the vibes that you produce, essentially, right? You produce certain vibes when you live a certain way, which then you can put on a record and others can feel these vibes, but these vibes are not just they're not just there because you want them to be there. It's because of the way you live and how you go about doing things, how you control and tame your aura, how you don't allow other people to drain your energy. All that comes out in the record, and the energy that you're able to produce is how do you manage your energy? How do you manage your chi? That's going to come out in the records. If you're able to successfully manifest or manipulate your chi, now you're able to do miraculous things in that studio. You're able to do miraculous things with your dance moves, with your graffiti, with the beats you're able to produce. You're able to do miraculous things if you can hold and maintain your energy. So essentially, it's like martial arts. Hip hop is a form of martial arts. Again, you're just not beating people's ass. You're doing it creatively with the technology, with the technomancy. It's a form of martial arts, but it's done in the techno world. We produce sounds of war. We produce words of war, images of war. That's what we do. That's what hip hop is. We just implement technology. So that's what makes it modern. That means hip hop is the modern occult science because it implements technology. So even from the very beginning, hip hop has always implemented technology. So this has always been the case. It didn't just happen. People were already figuring out shit in the beginnings of hip hop. That's why they were able to do what they would do. Where we do it easy now, but it was a time where they had to figure this out, like with the turntables, the two turntables, and all that. Somebody had to figure out how to do that at some point. They figured it out, and then they began to build products around what a genius had figured it out. That's hip hop required minds of geniuses because they were figuring out things that were not done before. As I said, as if some alien presence came over these people and then gave them downloads for them to start doing some miraculous things. It's like hip hop was here one day. Well, hip hop wasn't here one day, and one day hip hop just suddenly came. That's how it appears to most people. One day they just suddenly got possessed by the spirit of hip hop. They really can't explain why it happened, how it happened. They just one day they became a hip hopper. They were influenced by hip hop and they just became a hip hopper. They knew what they wanted to do. They knew their journey. They knew everything when they was around that energy. You're like, okay, this is me. This is what I'm going to be a part of. I'm going to dedicate my life to. You already knew that as soon as you felt the energy, right? Because of the vibes that's coming from the men and the women that are producing this culture. Because you see how serious they are about their craft. That's why the music sounds so good. That requires skill. Why the art is so good, why the dance moves are so good, that requires skill, dedication, and again, it requires you to be a part of the occult in some form or fashion. Again, not somebody committing crimes or doing something crazy, but you will essentially be amongst these people, or be around these people. So you have to adhere to the same laws. So if you are a part of hip hop, you will be amongst other hip hoppers, and they may be into all types of shit, but that don't mean that you're able to say anything about it. You have to keep the oath of silence, even if you're not doing it, even if you're not engaging in it. So you still must live by the code, even if you're not doing anything personally. You still have to keep that oath of silence. You still have to be somebody trustworthy. Because if you're a person talking, you're not going to be allowed into the inner circles if you're going to be talking about what's going on in the inner circle. That's why people don't know about what's going on in the inner circle, because you're not supposed to talk about what's going on in the inner circle, because it is a cult. That's why only certain people are allowed around certain people. You're not just about to run up on a Jay-Z and then he tell you secrets. There's levels that you will have to go through to even be in the same room with this person, because it's ruled by the occult. That's what the occult is. Like, you don't just get to be amongst these people just because you enjoy their music or something. You like these. When you are a master of your craft, you can essentially control your reality. You can control who is amongst you and who isn't amongst you, because you have mastered your craft. Meaning you have earned it. You have allowed yourself to learn the skill set to create your own world. So when you have people creating their own world, you got to adhere to their rules and regulations. They're not about to adhere to yours. The only time somebody has to adhere to yours is if you create your own reality, which is what we're supposed to be doing. That's what makes us a part of hip hop. We are creating our own. So we don't have to come on other people's time. They come on our time, because you are the master, right? So you put yourself in a position to be a master so that people come to you on your time. You know what I mean? They want to see what you can do as a master, instead of you coming to them asking for a handout or asking them to do something for you. You don't have to go to nobody asking for anything. When you are the master, they come to you. You just show forth your mastery. But you do it in an occult way, through Islam, through mathematics, being a mathematician, being a scientist. So you understand what's required and what you have to maintain. You have to keep doing it, not just do it one time. You have to keep and be persistent. That's how people develop careers and not just one hit wonders, right? To do this as a career, to do this long term, requires discipline. That means now you're doing it even when you don't want to do it, even when you have bad days, right? That requires discipline. That requires patience. That requires you to understand the long game and not the short game. So if you live out this culture, this Islamic culture, I'm not saying that you got to go pick up a Quran or you got to start praying and do what Muslims do, because that don't mean you're a Muslim. Again, just because your culture is Islamic doesn't mean you're a Muslim. You're more so living in the path of a Sufi, which again, who wants to understand the subtleties of reality and how you can influence those subtleties of reality, because you are a part of those subtleties of reality. So it's you understanding yourself. That's why it's called knowledge of self. I am not just my flesh. I am also everything else. So how can I influence you? We know how to influence our flesh, but how do you influence things beyond the flesh if you are more than the flesh? That's the whole science right there. Like, okay, if you are really more than the flesh, you should be able to influence more than your own body. How do you go about doing that? That's why we all have planets, numerology, astrology. We have all the sciences we need, which will help us to understand who we are. This is the powers you have. This is how to best utilize the powers, meaning we already have access to all that data. It's just that you have to translate it. That's what makes it Islamic, meaning you got your whole life path is available to you. You can get this stuff done online for free. You just have to interpret it. You can get your astrology chart done, your numerology chart, all that can be done for free. You ain't got to pay nobody. But you have to understand how to translate it, how to make sense of it. So they'll give you all the symbols and the degrees, but you still got to make sense of it because you are the one living it out. Can you see your life in those degrees? Like, damn, I am living out that shit. That is exactly, how I am. Do you see yourself in those degrees? In the math? Do you see yourself in the mathematics? This is basically what I'm saying. Because again, we are using the Arabic numbers. There would be no astrology, numerology, Kabbalah, all that without the number zero. That's what makes the Arabic numbers different than the Roman numbers. The Roman numbers didn't have a zero. The Arabic acknowledges zero. That's what makes math more advanced. Now we can do things like trigonometry, calculus, statistics, all that requires a number zero. That's from the Arabic numbers. Again, the Islamic influence. That's why I'm always talking about numbers. That's just the culture of Islam. We have to understand these numbers, the reality of the numbers. They are more than what they appear to be. If you understand how to work these numbers, then you're going to be in a very good position in life because everything is about numbers. Everything is geometry. Everything is mathematics. That's the language of the universe, mathematics. So the more you understand the language of the universe, the more you understand how the universe is communicating to you and how it's essentially revealing to you exactly what you should be doing with yourself. It's clear as day to the mathematician, but to the ones who is not a mathematician, they're completely blind to these realities, that the omens that the universe send to us on a daily basis. That's not something that you can just tap into because you want to. It's an art, it's a skill set, it's a culture. You have to consider yourself a part of the culture and do what the culture does. You have to move the way the culture moves. As a hip hopper, it's the way you move, the way you speak, the way you think. All this makes you hip hop. It's these invisible forces that you're manipulating that's manifesting through the visible forces. So you're manipulating invisible forces that's manifesting in the visible form, right? I mean, you probably wouldn't know what a person knows just by looking at them, but it's not till they open their mouth and produce sound. Now you know, okay, this person knows something. You may not just be able to tell just by appearance, but once they produce their sound, now it becomes obvious. So I'm just making these connections here that so we can understand how all this is one. These are not things we need to look at as separate realities. This is all one consciousness. So to consider yourself hip hop, you're basically Islamic, which makes you a mathematician, which means I am studying the language of the universe. And the more you understand the language, the more thorough your communication becomes with the universe, which is just your own higher self, your occultic energies. So you just understand, like, okay, how does this work and how to best utilize what I already have, what I've already had. Now I just understand it on an invisible level instead of a visible level, right? So that's essentially what this is all about. So there's a message for the fellow hip hoppers, the fellow Thelemites, fellow Islamic adherers, whatever you consider yourself. To me, it's all the same thing. It's all one. We're all essentially at the same goal. We're doing the same thing. We're just utilizing different methods. So that's why I bring it up to hip hop, because hip hop takes you into the technomancy. That's what makes you different than a Muslim. That's what makes you different than somebody, into the religious specter. You're mastering technology. You're not just using it for business. You are a master of the technomancy, right? You are a technomancer. You're not the person that's just dealing with magical herbs and crystals. You are the technomancer. You are the Martian from Mars. That's what Elijah Muhammad said, right? We're from Mars. Before we was here, we was on Mars. So we're really Martians. That's why I say it's like some alien intelligence came and people are like, what the fuck is going on? Because we are from Mars. So we got that Mars intelligence within us, which is, again, the energy of nine. So we are fully tapped into the intelligence of Mars, and we channel it into the Earth. And then we create what we call hip hop, love, Thelema, law, and all these things that help us to advance further in our reality. So with that, I bear peace. 93. Love is a law. Love under will. We out.